Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. I want to share a story with you about Scott Turner. Scott Turner is the Secretary of HUD. I've done a video on Scott Turner already when he went in front of Congress a few months ago. But recently, several whistleblowers who are civil rights attorneys at HUD came out and exposed how HUD is weakening the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And immediately I started thinking, why? Why? Now, I already know why, but it still baffles me. So I'm going to share with you why, and I want to share with you this story, and I'm going to go through. It's an article that we're going to read, and we're going to look at it closely because housing rights are very, very, very important for us African-American people, for everybody. But especially us, because a lot of our wealth is tied up in home ownership. Now, whites and Asians and other groups of people, ethnicities, they have a lot of their money also in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and so on. But the average black family, the wealth that we have, and there is this huge wealth gap, is typically tied up in their houses. So housing rights are extremely important for us. Hey, family, do you believe in the work we're doing? Does our content speak to you? Do you appreciate our in-depth legal analysis and political commentary from an African-American perspective? Do you believe it matters to our community? Then don't just watch from the sidelines. Please click that membership button and become a member of the 2% Club today. That's right, we need just 2% of our subscribers to become channel members. For just $4.99 a month, that's less than 20 cents a day, you'll help us keep creating powerful content that defends our democracy, demands justice, and develops a strong African-American community. But if you want more, at $9.99 a month, which is only 33 cents a day, you'll get access to exclusive members-only live streams, bonus content, and behind-the-scenes updates. And for just $14.99 a month, which is under 50 cents a day, our top-tier members get access to live Zone calls, strategy sessions, and a direct voice in shaping this movement. We're not just building a YouTube channel. Folks, we're building a movement based on righteousness and justice, just what our community needs in a time of disinformation and division. So if you believe in what we're doing, click the membership button and join now. Become a member of the 2% Club today. Let's build something powerful together. And why on earth Scott Turner, and there's another black man that you shall see who's working with Scott Turner, working under Scott Turner, why these men are helping Trump weaken, gut, whatever you want to call it, the Fair Housing Act is a head scratcher. But I think I have the answer here. Okay? Now, let's go to another screen. Let's get into this very, very, what I would call sad story. All right, so let's start out with the definition of a term, internalized racism. This says internalized racism is defined as acceptance by members of the stigmatized races of negative messages about our own abilities and extrinsic worth. In other words, we as African Americans, we are a stigmatized ethnicity in this country. And internalized racism is when we internalize the racism that we have been victimized by. In other words, we actually start thinking about ourselves the way white supremacists think about us. So we internalize their racism. And subconsciously, we don't even know it. Subconsciously, we start thinking of ourselves through the eyes, through the prisms of the eyes of a white supremacist. Therefore, thinking of ourselves as inferior all the way around, physically, psychologically, intellectually, in all facets. We start seeing ourselves the very way they see us. This is a clinical definition. This is not something I made up. This is the woman whose name is at the bottom, Kamara Phillips Jones, MD, MPH, and a PhD. Very smart woman, very learned, very educated African-American woman. And she says internalized racism is defined as acceptance by members of the stigmatized races of negative messages about our own abilities and intrinsic worth. It is characterized by our not believing in others who look like us and not believing in ourselves. You see, when you are oppressed and you're told every day, both consciously, subconsciously, you're told overtly and covertly that you are less than, you are other. You're not as smart as everybody else. You're not as pretty as everybody else. You're not as beautiful as everybody else. You're not on everybody else's level. That has damage. And it's not just us. That's people of color around the country, around the world, actually, in this country and around the world. You see this happening all over the place. Take a country like India, where there is a huge colorism problem. And a whole lot of Indians over there in their country, a lot of them use bleaching cream because they too have been affected by this internalized racism. So yeah, it's not just us. It's people around the world, people of color, who are affected by the same racist, white supremacist garbage. All right, so she goes on to say, it involves accepting invitations or limitations to one's own full humanity, including one's spectrum of dreams, one's right to self-determination, and one's range of allowable self-expression. It manifests, watch this, here's how you see it. This is the way it manifests. It manifests in different ways, but here are some of the ways. It manifests as embracing whiteness. It comes out as whiteness, blacks embracing whiteness, blacks beginning to see the world through the eyes of white people. Because what has happened? They have internalized the racism of white supremacists. You see what I'm saying? So we start thinking like them. We start acting like them. We start talking like them. All right, again, internalized racism. So it manifests as embracing whiteness, that is hair straighteners, bleaching creams, skin tone stratification within communities of color, and the white man's ice is colder syndrome, right? It ain't true till you hear a white man say it. Self-devaluation, racial slurs as nicknames like the N-word, nigga. You know, that's all you hear. I hate hearing it. I hate hearing these young black men calling each other, even with the A, nigga. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Because I know it's this right here. I know it's internalized racism, although they say, well, no, it's really us taking that term, co-opting it. Well, why not create some other term? Why take the term that has been used against us, that has been weaponized against us? Because it's really internalized racism. And resignation and helplessness and hopelessness, school dropout, voter non-participation, whoa, boy, do we suffer from that. Voter non-participation, risky health practices, all of this is the result of internalized racism. Now, what I did was I took her definition and I morphed it into what I've seen in my own experiences personally and as a civil rights attorney, and I developed or reworked or rewrote what slave mentality means, because that's what that is to me. Internalized racism is another way of saying slave mentality. All right, slave mentality. We see it in the Bible. The Jewish people had been enslaved by the Egyptian people for 400 years. And when they came out, they were messed up so badly that God allowed everybody 20 and older to die out. He just had them roam in the wilderness for 40 years until they died out, everything over 20 years old. And the ones who were younger than 20 and younger, he let them live because they hadn't been so badly infected by the oppression, if you will. So here's my definition of slave mentality. And I borrowed some of Dr. Jones's clinical definition. A person level pattern, a person level, this is what a person has cooking on the inside of them. A person level pattern of internalized racism rooted in slavery, where some African Americans accept racist beliefs about Black inferiority and respond with deference and loyalty to white authority. That's what she calls embracing whiteness. Well, I took it just a little deeper. Embracing whiteness to me and what I've seen is Black people who give great deference to white people and show great loyalty, even when those white people are racist and white supremacists. It's what our ancestors did to survive on the plantation. It caused a lot of Blacks to have a slave mentality, showing great deference to whites, even racist whites, and showing great loyalty, including policing other Black people to win approval or avoid punishment. So these people who have this slave mentality, this internalized racism, Dr. Jones says that they tend to police other Black people to win the white man's approval or to avoid punishment. We see that. Now, with that in mind, let's now talk about HUD. Now, keep this in mind. I am not in no way saying that this is what Scott Turner suffers from. I don't know Scott Turner. I've never met him. I don't know him. I'm talking about why generally there are so many Black men who are helping Trump harm their own community. I don't know if Scott Turner suffers from this. I don't know. I'm not qualified to diagnose him. I just want you to keep this in your thinking as you think about when you ask yourself, why are there so many Black men who voted for Trump knowing that he is a racist? And why now so many, and there would be more if he would have brought them in. They were running around doing their best to be a part of Trump's administration, but he only chose one like he did the last time and put that one Black person over the same agency, HUD. All right, so now with that in mind, let's get into a little bit of this story. Trump appointees roll back enforcement of fair housing laws, which is the same thing he's doing with civil rights. He's rolling back enforcement. They're not changing it at the congressional level, except for the Voting Rights Act. They're not changing the structure of it, okay, Civil Rights Act. Now, they are doing that with the Voting Rights Act. All right, so the Supreme Court is reinterpreting it and gutting it. All right, but this is just simply not enforcing the Civil Rights Act where Black people are concerned and the Fair Housing Act, just not enforcing it, putting people over the agencies who will not enforce the provisions of the Fair Housing Act. So that's what is happening according to several whistleblowers at HUD. All right, this goes on to say interviews and internal documents show that signature civil rights protections in housing are being dismissed as ideologically driven and DEI in disguise. So, despite what the Fair Housing Act says should be occurring in housing, the Trump administration, specifically Scott Turner, who's over HUD, and there's a black guy who helps him as well, are not enforcing those provisions. So that gives way to what? Redlining. That gives way to unfair appraisals. That gives way to realtors directing black people to, primarily or predominantly black communities and away from white communities. That could give way to restrictive covenants. All sorts of things if people know that HUD is not going to enforce the provisions of the Fair Housing Act. All right, this says, in one email, a Trump appointee at the Department of Housing and Urban Development described decades of housing discrimination cases as artificial, arbitrary, and unnecessary. So the Trump administration are saying that these housing discrimination cases, they're artificial, they're not real, they're arbitrary, just it's not based on much of anything, and they're unnecessary. And another, a career supervisor in the department's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, objected to lawyers being reassigned to other offices. The supervisor was fired 6 days later for insubordination. So this lawyer said, we don't need to reassign these lawyers who handle these housing discrimination cases. We need to keep them here. That lawyer was fired. In a third, the office's director of enforcement warned that Trump appointees were using gag orders and intimidation to block discrimination cases from moving forward. The urgent message was sent to a U.S. senator who is referring it to the department's acting inspector general for reinvestigation. Now, you see the three men down on the bottom. Scott Turner, Senator Ed Brooke, and Gibbs. His last name is Gibbs. He also works at HUD. Now, why is Ed Brooke? Why do I have Ed Brooke in that photo? Because Ed Brooke was a black Republican, and he was instrumental in getting the Fair Housing Act done. He worked with LBJ to get the Fair Housing Act enacted. You see, black Republicans back in that day, they fought for civil rights. They fought for the Fair Housing Act. They fought for voting rights. They're not like black Republicans today who fight against civil rights, fight against the Fair Housing Act, fight against the Voting Rights Act, Clarence Thomas to be exact. So that black man, Senator Edward Brooke, he fought for the Fair Housing Act, and now today you got two black men who are not enforcing it because Trump says it's DEI. God help us. In interviews, half a dozen current and former employees of HUD's Fair Housing Office said that the Trump political appointee had made it nearly impossible for them to do their jobs, which involved investigating and prosecuting landlords, real estate agents, lenders, and others who discriminate based on race, religion, gender, family status, or disability. That is awful. Do you remember Navy Federal, I think it was last year, was accused of discriminating against blacks in mortgage applications? Well, there's no incentive now for Navy Federal and other lenders and appraisers and all of them to do the right thing, because the Trump administration is using two black men to basically say, go for it. Go for the racism. Go for the discrimination. Now, as I said earlier, I don't know that these two men are suffering from internalized racism, but I know that is the case with a whole lot of black people. They have internalized the racism of white supremacists, and subconsciously, I would say. And now that is manifesting as showing extreme deference and loyalty, even to white people who are trying to hurt us. That's where we are. We've been there, but we're seeing it now in a blatant fashion. I mean, a blatant fashion. Several lawyers said they had been blocked from communicating with clients without approval from a Trump appointee and had been barred from citing some past housing civil rights cases when researching legal precedent for possible new prosecutions. One internal memo from a top Trump appointee in the office said that archival documents that were contrary to administration policy would be removed or replaced, and that tenuous theories of discrimination would no longer be pursued. If you're not enforcing the Fair Housing Act, then it's just another dead law, said one of the career lawyers in the office, Palmer Heenan, who has been told without explanation that he will be reassigned next month. So he's right. Absolutely right. If you're not enforcing the Fair Housing Act, you have essentially gutted it. 65%, the staff reduction at HUD's Fair Housing Office. Some of the internal documents framed the changes as efficiency measures, and the resulting cuts to the office have been drastic. When the so-called Department of Government Efficiency initiated its cost-cutting spree, federal offices lost, on average, about 10% of their employees. Within the Office of Fair Housing, the reduction was 65%. There were 31 employees in January. Once mandatory transfers go through next month, there will be 11. So you can't enforce what you don't have employees to do. This is shameful. The Fair Housing Act, Lyndon Johnson signed it into law about a week after Dr. King was assassinated. So it was kind of done in his name. And now you got black men who won't enforce it. Last week, John Gibbs, that's the other black man that you saw down in that photo. Last week, John Gibbs, the Trump-appointed Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing, sent 2 memos detailing how future enforcement efforts will proceed. In previous administrations, he wrote, fair housing offices leverage the Fair Housing Act against mortgage providers, appraisers, and others in an ideological matter, but that will now change. So appraisers can discriminate now. And that's really bad, because if your house is worth $500,000 and you're trying to sell it, and the appraiser comes in and appraises it at $400,000, you just lost $100,000 of wealth. And that is pretty commonplace in the mortgage and real estate industry. And Biden put in place ways to stop that. And Scott Turner and John Gibbs and Trump is working against that now. Cases involving tenuous theories of discrimination would no longer be prioritized, he wrote. The types of cases identified by Mr. Gibbs had been central to the office's work. They included appraisal bias, which typically involves white appraisers, undervaluing homes owned by black families, zoning restrictions used to block housing that might be occupied by black and Latino families, and gender or gender expression cases, including new housing protections added under the Biden administration. Casey Lovett, a spokeswoman for HUD, said in a statement that it was patently false to suggest the department was looking to blunt enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. The Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, she said, is using its authority to uphold the law, protect the vulnerable, and ensure meaningful access to housing. So that's the Trump administration's response to this. Ms. Lovett also said that the new administration had inherited a deeply inefficient case system and accused the Biden administration of allowing cases to languish. Okay? Since President Trump took office, the department has handled over 4,000 cases, according to the statement, which is on par with previous years, accounting for cases that carry over from one year to another. Ms. Lovett did not address, however, how many of the cases had been investigated or had resulted in legal action. In other words, of those 4,000 cases, how many were just dismissed, just overlooked, based on what Mr. Gibbs called tenuous facts? Lawyers in the office contend that cases often take longer than expected because of the complexity and insufficient resources. Before the cuts, the office had 22 lawyers working on fair housing cases, fielding around 2,000 new complaints a year. Local fair housing nonprofits receive around 32,000 additional inquiries each year. 32,000. Charges of discrimination are also sharply down. When investigators find evidence of a crime, they issue a formal document that requires the accused to appear before a judge. On an average year, HUD issues 35 charges. Since the beginning of the Trump administration, there have been 4, according to lawyers in the office. Now, I want to get to, this is John Gibbs. We saw him just a moment ago. There's so much more here, but I want you to see this gentleman. He is a civil rights lawyer who worked at HUD, and he was fired last week. He was escorted out of the building. And he is one of the whistleblowers. He is one of the people who said HUD is not enforcing fair housing cases. All right? So sadly and unfortunately, there are black men who not only helped Trump get elected, but are now inside the government, harming the very legislation that enabled those black men and others to become homeowners in the first place. And millions of other blacks, because we couldn't become homeowners in a fair way before the Fair Housing Act, because they redlined us, right? They wouldn't loan money to people who lived in certain zip codes. They wouldn't give money to people in those zip codes to remodel their houses, refinance their houses, to rebuild their houses. And they couldn't go to the white neighborhoods because, again, they had those restrictive covenants, which basically had written in deeds, you cannot sell this house to a black person. And that dramatically affected our ability to build and create wealth. And here we are again, right back, not because we don't have the law in the books, but because we have a president who is anti-black, and he has several black sycophants who are doing his bidding. Now, whether they suffer from internalized racism, I don't know. Okay? And these are alleged facts. They've not been litigated. So I don't know if the allegations are true. I'm just telling you what's being reported. But if it is true, if those facts are true, it is shameful, especially that black men are making it happen. It is shameful. I did a video not long ago on a rule called the AFFH rule. The Affirmative Furthering of Fair Housing is what it stands for. A rule that Obama put in place. And I told you in a Project 2025 video that the Trump administration would gut that rule. And they did that early on when Scott Turner was put in office. Early on, they did that shortly after Trump was sworn in. All right, and here are other ways that they are now, again, not enforcing the Fair Housing Act. Just shameful. I had to bring you this story. There's so much going on, so much happening around the country, so much. But I'm going to keep bringing what's happening that affects us as African Americans, because much of this is targeted to us. All right? I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, stay woke.